Hello and welcome to another late night talk. My guest this afternoon, this evening slash today is Hannah Kaner. Hi, Hannah. Welcome.
Hello.
Hello. Hello.
Thank you for having us.
You are most welcome. You're most welcome. So let's go back to the beginning. Let's do your origin story. Tell people, what were you reading when you were growing up? What got you into science fiction, fantasy, speculative fiction, as we now kind of call it sometimes?
Oh wow, I mean, I was pretty voracious as a kid. I would read anything I could get my hands on. Many things that are probably deeply inappropriate. I mean, I remember,
Okay. Wow. Good place to start.
yeah, well, but I remember like when Lord of the Rings was like films were first coming out, my parents said I had to read The Hobbit and all three Lord of the Rings books before it came out. I'd already read The Hobbit, and I was like 6 or 7. I read the Northern Lights, so I was really obsessed with kind of like Lyra. And I've been reading a lot of like Beyond the Deep Woods by Chris Riddell, who is the artist. And oh, for goodness sake, I've forgotten the name of the other author. But I love those books because they were just so full of adventure and magic. And then yeah, so I can't really remember a time when I couldn't read and when I wasn't kind of grabbing books off the shelves. Very much my dad was always like reading stories to us as well. And then it kind of started as a few pebbles of fantasy writing, and then it was like a deep dive into Terry Pratchett. And never have I emerged from the worlds that have been created. So really, it's just kind of more about exploring further and further in to the different realms of fantasy.
Yeah. Have you read all of the Pratchett ones? Because there's a couple that I've left them and I'm not sure I want to read them yet, because once I've read them, that's it and they're done. And I'm like, I've
Similar
got
to
one Gamel book I've not read and I'm
the
leaving it. I'm just like, I'm not ready yet.
these last years, I can't touch yet. I still get quite emotional about it. So
Yeah.
yeah, the temptation is there. And I will at some point when I feel like my heart is ready. But it's the same with Ursula Le Guin, but I kind of yeah remember going back to um a lot of her stories, like even from the smallest ones like Cat Wings into like the Distressed, and just really enjoying that.
Mm.
So I think kind of returning to Terry Pratchett will be kind of like a homecoming.
Yeah, yeah. When I was growing up, it was the Earthsea trilogy, and now there's like 6 books. I went and picked them all up from Gollancz in the sale and got like the special hardbacks. I'm like, I'm ready now to read them, but there's more than I knew, so I can go back and read like 4 or 5 and a bunch of stories. I'm like, what's all this? Where's this come from?
This
So
is the thing, is like I'm pretty sure I won't have read all of Terry Pratchett. I just don't know what I haven't read yet because like, it's 30, 40. Like he was very prolific. He was a brilliant
mm,
writer. So yeah, the numbers will keep ticking up.
definitely, definitely. So when did you first start like tinkering around and writing your own stories, or were you always doing it as a kid?
Definitely was as a kid. I mean, I had an overactive imagination and lived in the countryside, so it was now asked to be. But um I definitely started writing with the purpose of like writing a book when I was sort of 12 or 13. But the first kind of full length sort of 80,000 word manuscript. I was like 14 or 15, and I
Nice.
really am just quite an obsessive person, and I really wanted to write a story, and it was essentially like modern world Avatar: The Last Airbender fan fiction. And it will never see the light of day, but I was really proud of it, and I remain so because just precocious ass little 14-year-old just thinks, well, I could play video games and I probably should, but I'm going to do this instead, which is weirder.
Yeah, I wrote my first novel as part of my A level English, so it's I can do this. I know what I'm doing. No one
Yeah,
will ever see that piece of shit, and rightly so, because it's terrible.
I think it's
So,
right. We've got to write the bad stuff. Like we've got to kind of write stuff out where everything that you're reading at a time somehow finds its way into the voice of the text. You've got to write out the sort of the stories that you tell yourself as a kid that are kind of like self-inserts into worlds that you loved. And I think those things are all natural parts of like discovering yourself as a writer. And that's kind of really a fantastic thing. So I think, yeah, writing the stuff that no one will ever see is still such an important part of beginning.
yeah, I think writing fan fiction is really good. I did a lot of it as well because it teaches you how to, if you were doing like work for hire or something, how to fit you into a certain style and how to fit certain characters, because you know it all and you put yourself insert in as the hero or whatever it might be. But it's teaching you stuff that you can use later on. So I did loads of like stuff like that years ago. Yeah, always useful. So people will obviously know you from Godkiller, but your path to kind of publication did not start. Did not start then, did it?
No.
But your story's like mine in terms of it's about determination and perseverance that got you to where you are today.
Yeah.
So
I
so
think,
tell us about that.
I mean, what makes a writer is not just the putting words to the page, it's not even finishing a full manuscript. I mean, those things absolutely make a writer, but it's to keep going, even when people go, nah. So Godkiller was the seventh book I wrote. I've written some books before I found an agent, and some books whose Juliet versions, and some books afterwards as well. And so when I first signed with Juliet with my like sort of first epic fantasy book, I thought that was me made. That was me. I was going to get a book published. That was going to be my life. I was going to be an author extraordinaire, and that was, I could see the pathway opening up in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
And when I first got turned down by publishers, it was absolutely gut wrenching because it felt like kind of I'd already done the thing, I'd already had the rejections, I'd already been rejected by bunches of agents, and
Mm-hmm.
I'd already gone through edits, and I thought this was the next step to the rest of my life. And it really grounded me, understanding that so rarely does that happen with writers, is that the first book that they write gets published, or even the second or the third or the fourth. So with Julia, they kind of asked, what do I do now? And she said, just write another one. So I did. And that one also didn't go anywhere. So I wrote a third one and that didn't go anywhere. And then I wrote
Wow.
Godkiller.
So hang on. So going back a step. So I think some writers who are, trying to do the traditional publishing route, there's that constant drive, always the first huge hurdle they think that puts them on the path to the rest of their life is getting that agent.
Mm.
And you got the agent. She saw something in that first epic fantasy book that she obviously loved and obviously wanted to champion. And what people probably won't know is you and I actually have the same literary agent, and we met
Oh, yeah.
years ago at those karaoke and mojitos, but I won't talk about that.
Put those stories back in the box.
Uh, what happens in the box stays in the box. Yeah. But she must have seen something in your writing then. There's something that she obviously said, this is working. There's something there. There's something that I think people are going to love and take forward. So that must have been a massive step and encouraging because you've got the agent now.
Absolutely. I mean, such an incredible agent like Juliet was, I mean, I'd already admired her for a while, because she's so, um, well, she represents people from a lot of different genres. She's really passionate about her advocacy for authors. And so, yeah, I really admired Juliet. So when she offered to represent me, I was like, it was also kind of, it's really good to know that kind of sometimes it goes not the way that you expect, even with the best agent, even with a really decent book, because it's so much down to luck of timing, luck of editor, sometimes just luck of the draw of what else they've got on their list at the moment. And also, what's selling at the moment, as well. And so one of the amazing things about Juliet is that despite four books with her going out, or three books with her going out and never going anywhere, she stuck by me as a writer because she believed in my writing. That's what she would always come back to, was that she was like, you are a great writer. You're constantly learning for each book that you write, but you just have to keep going. You have to keep doing it. And that was something I always came back to, because quite a few times I did think about giving up. And like, I
Yeah.
started like pursuing a different career path, which was in technology, which felt more kind of stable. And I was writing kind of on the side of that. Like I realized last year that I'd never had a holiday where I hadn't been writing during the holiday, like through my entire life. Because it was kind of like breathing to me. But at some points I was like, what is the purpose of this if it never sees light of day? Should I self-publish? Should I just stop entirely? And what it all came back to was that I guess I also believed in my writing. I also believed that I still found joy in it, and I still found joy in the kind of art communication, even if it never sold ink, and even if it never went to an editor. I wanted to do work that I was proud of.
Mm.
And that's what kept us going, is to constantly go back and say, you know, does this make me feel joy? And sort of pursuing that thread of it, rather than seeing it as a uh, take it out with the drudgery of a day-to-day work life, which certainly wasn't by that point. I was really enjoying my work as well, but just kind of more, I want to write because it feels like, yeah, breath. It feels like being alive.
Yeah, yeah. I never understand writers who say they love the process of having written. And I'm like, if you don't enjoy the actual process of doing it, then I'm not, I can't relate to that. That's something I really struggle with, and people say that.
I mean,
Um,
I wait for editing, but that's just part of writing for me. I love the kind of having something down and being able to play with it. But I also love the act of exploring worlds and writing that and like bringing all the threads together, which is part of my probably my favorite part of the process is having created something special and then tearing it apart and putting it back together again in a slightly different shape.
I think what's also interesting is that some people have the misconception as well that an agent won't nurture clients like Juliet has done with you. Like, you know, the first book, second book didn't go anywhere. But she believed in you and she stayed with you because she believed in your talent. And I think some people feel that if their first book doesn't do well or doesn't get a massive, you know, bestseller or something, then that's the end. The agent will drop them. And I think there's a lot of negativity around traditional publishing because that's one of the reasons that people say, oh well, they just drop you and walk away. And I'm like, it doesn't always work that way. Most of the time I've not heard it happen to people that way.
No, I think it can vary like kind of between sort of UK publishing culture and US publishing culture and also who your agent is.
Mm.
Obviously we're really lucky to have someone who's, you know, really um dedicated to her authors and being an agent for them. But also kind of like I tried to recognize that this was a business and I didn't need Juliet to like constantly pat me on the head and tell me it was going to be okay. I was like, okay, I'm going to go away, write another book, and I'll come back to you in 6 months. I didn't want to kind of like abuse her generosity if I can, because I
Yeah.
wasn't, you know, she gets a percentage of what we sell, not a percentage of what we're not selling. Um, but it is much it's not so common as it feels that an agent will drop you if your first book or second book or third book doesn't sell. And talking to your agent when you first start a relationship with them, which is, you know, getting an agent is a massive milestone. It should be something people are really, really proud of because it was really difficult.
Mm.
But talking with them, you know, what happens if it doesn't sell? What's our backup plan? Like, kind of what's our approach here? It's probably a useful conversation to have to really gauge whether this is the right agent for you.
Yeah. 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 Having Juliet in my corner has always been something I've really appreciated. She's there to champion, you know, the work of her clients, and she absolutely does. So um, I'm always glad she's there to call on and to have a conversation with and be like, is it me? And she'll be like, no, it's not you. Okay, okay, just double checking.
Yeah, absolutely.
So then, of course, you wrote Godkiller. So obviously, asking the writer where they get ideas from, I hate that question. But do you know where the seeds of the idea came for Godkiller? Like, can you trace what was going around in your head that helped you build a book?
I mean, the first character in Godkiller I wrote was the Godkiller, was
Yes,
Kissing.
yeah.
And I wanted to write I suppose I'd been reading a lot of fantasy that had been recommended to me by other people and felt frustrated with a lot of portrayal of women in that fantasy and that they were often very beautiful, they were often very sweet, or they were damsels, or they were kind of like sexy vixens who were just kind of, you know, kind of coming with like an assassiny sword and stab you. And you know, I love those stories. They're fantastic, but I just never saw me. Like even growing up with fantasy, I never saw something that was someone who wasn't pretty and wasn't straightforward and was as gritty and brutal and uh, stubborn as sort of the more male representations of fantasy. And I do think that has changed massively since I was growing up, and there's so much coming out now which really is invested in the kind of in the characters themselves, not just as kind of proxies for different ideas of people. And that's, that's wonderful. And I feel like I'm really writing into a much wider canon than I was. But yeah, I think that's kind of where the seed of the character came from. And then through, I suppose, like Me Too movements and sort of antagonism in this world against women, I just felt very angry, and I wanted to write someone who was angry, and I wanted to kind of lean into that. And I just loved building this character out of anger and spite and humor and kind of all these traits I felt were not often associated with women because they were too icky. And so it was so much fun to write someone who is a massive asshole, and is created to be, and she's big and she's larger than life. And so I think kind of a lot of those threads went into Kissing, and the idea of a kind of the rugged hero adopting a child who was kind of almost a foil to them and had to kind of expose another side of them. But then I wanted to write another knight errant as well, and so I really wanted a contrast with Kissing, who so someone who's a bit more like tight-laced and a bit more adult, I suppose, in some ways. And so that's kind of where the idea of Elo came, sort of from, I know, Gawain and the Green Knight or Arthur's Knights of the Round Table, someone who really is noble and who practices nobility. And the kind of story came from the idea of knights errant on a quest, I suppose. And I just really wanted to toy with the quest narrative and what that means for characters, and to explore a world where of gods and monsters and magic.
So feeding into that, was there any particular mythologies that fed into the gods and the monsters? Were you pulling on, Norse or Greek or Scandinavian or something from other parts of the world?
I mean, there's definitely aspects of a huge amount of like kind of different folklores. I mean, so the god of white lies is like Skedi, who is a Volkertinger, which is from Bavarian mythology. There's Hestra, the god of hearths, who's kind of similar to Hestia, who's from Greek myth. There's a citizen, the god of the sea, who, you might have a glimmer of Poseidon, but he's the god of the North Sea, so he's a bit on the kind of crabbier side. And so I think the Greek pantheon, particularly in like current fantasy writing and retellings and historical writing, has come really to the forefront of people's imaginations. And I'm sure it's had an impact on mine as well. Because Greek gods were awful, awful assholes.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
That's, I guess, where I wanted this idea of someone who would, hold them to account, who wasn't kind of necessarily powerful, but who was really clever. So I definitely think that would have played a part in it. And then other aspects, I think, just pulled from, mainly superstitions, folklore, Celtic folklore, or glimmers of trickster gods in Norse mythology, or gods of safe haven came from the idea of like kind of traveling communities, finding somewhere safe to be. So yeah, it was definitely pulled from a few different places, but no specific one where I put you and say,
Yeah.
that's my pantheon. I've nicked it and I put it in my book.
No. So this is a selfish question for me. How did your home, the Northeast, how did that feature or feed into the book?
Definitely some parts of the coastline. And so to anyone watching, you probably know Stephen's from the Northeast. I'm also from the Northeast.
Hello.
You couldn't tell by the fact I said book, but it was so a citizen and Talisha is kind of like part of the Northeast coastline is similar because of like all these natural harbors inside kind of cliff walls. There's this idea I had for Talisha and where Kissing was born. So though I wouldn't say Talisha was Northeast, it's definitely kind of a mixture of a load of different places. I just like the idea of the North Sea being such a prominent character both in her life and the kind of beginning of the book. And then other aspects, like more small little Easter eggs for anyone from the Northeast who might notice, like my sister reading it recognized the name of a hill in our local town called Har Hill. I'll call like a sea fog a fret, which is like specific to the Northeast. And yeah, just like little small things in terms of language and dialects. I just like to just thread in there out of sheer love of it, to be honest. Less out of any particular direct plan to make the Northeast part of this book, but instead to kind of show my love for where I came from and their landscapes and their hills and the beauty.
Yeah, yeah, I do love the Northeast and I miss it. It's been a while, a few months since I've been there, so I'm due a visit. Definitely,
Yeah,
I'm definitely due a visit.
I think when you come from, I mean, so I grew up very much in the countryside and now I live in Scotland. I like to go hiking a lot, and just like when you're in really rural, quiet places, that sense of being surrounded by nature and sky and mystery and stories really kind of feels like it comes out of the ground.
Mm.
And yeah, those sort of traveling parts of the story, which I really love. I love a quest and like kind of discovering a land story. It really came out of this idea of, um, I guess, nature and the mysticism of the wild.
Yeah, yeah, I grew up by the sea, but now I live by forests. I spend a lot of time working in forest and doing things in there and working with my hands. And there's just something about the silence and the stillness and being completely out in nature. And sometimes there's no cars, there's no power lines, there's just the land. And it's very, very different. I miss the sea, but I love being out in the forest as well. It just
Mm,
energizes me, really.
yeah, I can imagine.
Mm. So what is your, now that you've done, you've done a few books and then you came to Godkiller, what does your writing process look like? Are you a planner or are you a plotter? Are you somewhere between the two? How did you build this book?
I feel like each book has been different and
Right.
has needed a slightly different approach. I think overall my preferred way is, I suppose it's quite iterative, is to write a full draft, maybe with some gaps in it from front to back chronologically or whatever kind of process the story is in, and then to rewrite it. Or before I send it to an agent is to I guess I'm trying to get the bones of the story. And as I'm writing out the bones of the story, or certain scenes that I've been living in my head for a long while, filling those out, and from those starting to discover what the kind of threads of information that should be passed through the book, what the twists are going to be, what the emotional development is going to be, which I feel like is I feel most able to explore when I'm fleshing out a character and their interactions with the world or the people around them.
Mm,
So with my third book, which I'm working on at the moment, um, I wrote maybe 50,000 words of key scenes, like in different parts of the book. And
hmm
now I'm kind of threading them together with like a much more structured narrative. So I guess it's like maybe pantsing, but then planning on top of it, and then just like keeping on like going back through it. Feels like, I don't know, carving something out of wood. First you get the overall shape, and then you start like whittling it down to what
Yeah.
it needs to be.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You hack it with a chainsaw, and then by the end of it, you've got like a toothbrush and a bit of sandpaper, and you're just kind of tweaking the ledges off. But you got to do multiple layers before you get to that bit.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
it's just you've got to give yourself permission to be bad or you'll never finish the first draft. And I think that's something I always have to come back to is so I do get in my own head and I do kind of like get stuck on different parts because I'm like, I'm not getting this right. I mean, I spent yesterday and I wrote the same chapter 3 times in 3 different ways and eventually came with something that I think is good enough at least for me to pass on. But sometimes when you need to progress with a book, you just have to hand wave yourself over a couple of chapters and get to the next bit that you really want to write, and then look at it from a different angle in a few weeks' time, rather than just getting stuck on perfection.
Yeah, I do that. I sometimes chapter won't come, but I'll grind forward. And I always find when I look back, it's never as bad as I thought, or I can see what I was trying to do with a bit of distance, and I go, oh, okay, now I tweak this. Now it makes sense. But in the moment, it just feels shit, and you're like, God, this is awful.
What is this?
I just crying, writing.
Why is this my job? I'm bad at it.
Well, I get past that, and then I come back and I find that kind of oh shit moment is it's not too bad actually. I can improve.
It's
But
actually, I'm not as crap as I thought I was. That's good. It's good to know.
I have an oh shit moment, 40 to 50,000 words into every single book. Every single book
Oh
I've
yeah.
written, I have that.
It's that bit where you're kind of like, you need to start tipping it towards the end, and you're like, you're not really quite sure that you've got all the pieces in place, and you, yeah, 50,000 words is often my big pain point. Like, I think for a lot of people, it's either 30,000 or 50,000.
Mhm.
I think in many cases it is the half, like just before the halfway of the plot.
Yeah, yeah. And then some people get caught in that endless trap of going back and editing, and I'm like, no, leave it, put it down, move forward. You can always edit it once you've done it, but they're just like, oh no, I need to go back and make it perfect. I'm like, it's never perfect. It's just done. It's just out, you know.
Yeah, eventually you just got to stop reading it because it's never going to be. I mean, I say that sometimes you really can have the space to go back and tweak like little sentences and words and commas, but you're always going to miss something.
Mhm.
Like even with the best copy editors, even with the best editors, like some small tiny thing will be slightly off.
Like if I wrote my debut now, I'm sure there'd be a bunch of stuff I haven't changed, but I'm like, I don't want to go back and read it for some reason because I'll be thinking I'm not the same person I was when I wrote it in 2013. I'm not that guy anymore.
Yeah,
That was 11 years ago. Now it's like, yeah, I don't I no, I'm gonna leave it. So
yeah, I think we all change, and you read something that's kind of like going back in time to who you were when you wrote it the first time,
yeah.
and you know that you as a writer will always be different. And so going back can be so exciting. I mean, with Samantha Shannon and the Born Season series, to kind of really take everything you've learned and reapply it to something that's so beloved. But then also, I think maybe I'll just leave Godkiller alone for it.
10 years and then come back and look at like she's done
Yeah,
with
exactly. Then
first
I would
season and be like, oh yeah, okay, that's fine.
add
Yeah.
in a bunch of extra chapters just for fun.
Yeah, special extra stuff we cut out the first time. Yeah. So this must have been a bit different as well, because for the first time you were writing a trilogy, a series. So how did you approach writing book one and then thinking, oh, actually, we're gonna have two and three, so I have to kind of hold some stuff back and not tie off some things and ideas for next one and all this kind of stuff.
Book one was because it follows a hero's journey, sort of the kind of archetypal story. It was quite easy to write, so I knew that it had to end when it got from A to B.
Yeah.
And I originally planned Godkiller as a duology, so that
Ah.
book two would have been B back to A essentially, which is probably for the best that I didn't do that because that probably would have got extremely tedious. But the idea was there. And so the first one, I was just, I guess, when I finished it was before I was well, before I was offered anything for it. So it felt like a really nice, complete little book, and I'd write another nice, complete little book if anything got published. But really, I was just sort of shooting another piece of pasta at the wall and seeing if it would stick, which it did, thank goodness. So then with book two and book three, I'm in the glorious position of being paid to write for the first time. And it was difficult to write book two, and that a lot of writers come to that when they're writing a trilogy because there is so much to develop that you don't want to kind of you don't want to put too little into it, you don't want to put too much into it. It's got to be a bridge from book one to book three, but it also needs to feel complete in itself. And you want
Yes,
the
that.
characters to regress, but not too far, because if they progress too far, then you're kind of like got nothing to take, nowhere to take them in book three. So it was really, really interesting. It really was a process of exploration. And really book two is deepens our understanding of the characters, whereas book three is much more about the conclusion to the story. But I still had to move them on, put them against some uh nasty experiences, and I'm really proud of it. And then book three, I'm just really enjoying so far, to be honest. It's now I'm in the rewriting stage. It just feels kind of fun, like exploring and sort of with characters that I know so well. I kind of feel like they're my friends. It's really personal to me. So yeah, I'm really, really enjoying the kind of bringing together of all these little tiny threads. But
I
certain
think
things I planned all the way through.
yes. Yeah. I think some people sort of say, oh, was the second book difficult because they think it's based upon feedback from the first one, but we're so far ahead in terms of writing a book that that isn't a thing. It's just like, oh, I read a bunch of views, now I've changed book two. It's like, no, I was pretty much done with two and we were in the heavy edits in it. That's not a thing. But because traditional publishing is, such a huge beast, it
Yeah,
moves slowly. So we're that far ahead all the time.
absolutely. Yeah. I don't think anything I've read would have changed the way it was
Yeah.
and the way it went, and not for book three either. So yeah, it finishes almost a year before it, comes out. In terms of like having written the structure of the story. So it has been which is kind of a relief as well in a way, because it'd be so easy to listen to people you respect and admire and the things that they say about the book, and you're like, oh yeah, that would be great. Then it's not your book, it's theirs. So we've got to kind of just like shut down everything else and take on critique, listen to our editors who are probably reading and exploring and thinking about all the other works that they're writing, but also just hold true to the story itself.
Yeah, one of the biggest fears I hear from people who don't want to go the traditional route is that they fear the editor will change the story to make it something that's not their own. And I constantly have to reiterate and say that isn't the case. And everything that they say is a suggestion. If you don't like it because it's diverting from your vision of the story, you can just say no.
Yeah, absolutely. The best editors are ones who are there to bring out the best of your voice and bring it out. Obviously, they have the context of the market and what's going to hopefully work better. But if they're changing fundamental aspects of the story, then it's not your book and you can say no. And there's never been an edit to which I don't feel have not felt happy saying no to. I think what's so brilliant about good editing though is like to be able to say, like, I'm seeing something here that I haven't picked up on. Should I kind of lean into that more? Should I think about this more? If like this isn't coming across in the right way, I don't need to take their suggestion, but I do want to take their eye and consider it again.
Yeah, I find it's clarity sometimes that
Mm,
I have a disconnect between what's in my head and what's on the page, because if you're working with a series, there's always more pieces in your head. And my
mm.
editor will say, oh, this doesn't make sense. I'm like, of course it does. And look what's actually on the text. And I go, oh, it doesn't, because I haven't properly explained it because it's the thing later on. And I go, oh shit, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Like it
That
all
fresh
makes
pair
sense
of
in my head.
eyes.
It's all there. And when it's kind of like, that's happened because of that, and their motivations because of that, and that makes complete sense. And you're like, yeah, but if that's not coming across in the text,
Yeah.
but it's nice that it's all in your head, but you need to, just put a little bit of it on the page.
Yeah, it's just sharpening the focus, I think, of
Mhm.
sometimes and making it clear. And as you say, the best editor can see what you're doing and they're trying to make it clearer for readers who don't have all the stuff that's in your head. I think, oh yeah, what's on the page? So what can you tell people about Sunbringer without spoiling it? What can readers expect? Because it's out soon. It's out 15th of February.
Out 15th February next month.
Ooh.
Sunbringer is we are taken back to this sort of fermenting rebellion, which is beginning to mm, sort of slowly thread its way through book one. It becomes much more part of the fall in book two. And Elo and Minara are kind of put against the sort of the worst sides of themselves and kind of the worst of what they've been through. And Skedi, the god, also has to reckon with there were elements of like his relationship with Inara in book one, of betrayal and really damaging betrayal that kind of isn't fully resolved by the end of it, and it can't be fully resolved by the end of book one because it's quite a short little book. So they've got to also deal with that kind of the impact of that and the fact that the two of them diametrically want different things, and being attached to each other and wanting different things is not so great for a healthy, thriving friendship. And then we have Kissing as well, who at the end of book one is lost into the sea and tells the priest she does survive, but she is taken back to Talisha to reckon with a whole other kind of the story that has sort of been hinted at in book one, but really sort of bursts out of the woodwork in book two and three. So we've basically got them all having to face all of our characters having to face their opposite selves, like kind of the things that they really held in kind of like moral certainty and having to deal with it. Like with that crumbling.
Mm. Someone asked and said, will there be any new point of view characters chapters in Songbringer?
Yes.
They were asking. You see, they were asking this, for thinking, who else might be coming in? So okay,
Yes, there will be one more point of view character in Sunbringer, and then at the moment in the third book, there's another point of view character, but we'll see if that lasts the edits. Because four was already a lot to start with. But I think it really helps round out the story and see things from a different point of view, literally. But Um, yeah, it was really fun to write. It was kind of almost a no-brainer for me, was to bring that voice in. So I'm really excited to see what people think of it.
Mm. Have you ever done first person in a novel before? I'm just
I
curious.
have tried, but not successfully. But it is in my plan to attempt it for my next trilogy. So,
Ah,
um,
okay, interesting. I yeah, I've done bits and pieces, but I've never done a full novel in it, and I'm kind of curious, to be
hmm.
honest. Um,
I think first person is cool. I think it's just hard to pull off without feeling so absorbed in the internal life of the character that you lose sight of the world. And I guess I naturally write in third person. I really like writing in third person, semi-immersive. So when you're reading a third person chapter, you know whose chapter it is, even if you don't have the heading, like because of the way they speak and the way they think and their kind of thoughts kind of emerge into the narrative. Whereas
hmm.
first person, you're kind of straight in their point of view, their kind of singular view of the world. And when it's done well, it's so cool. And when it's done poorly, it's so frustrating. So
You're stuck with that one person. You can't go anywhere else. That's the thing.
yeah.
Um, I think as a writer, I'd have to find the character. I wouldn't necessarily have to like them, but I'd have to find them infinitely fascinating to be able to write one or more books about that person because I can never
Absolutely.
go away from them. I'm just like, oh God, this goddamn person again.
That's the
So
great thing about, I mean, I did originally plan to write Godkiller just from one point of view and from Kirsten's point of view, but for his, because her voice is so strident and so uh witty and so kind of self-knowing,
mm,
it felt like it would only be a very one like really narrow window in a really complicated world. So the other points of view act as like foils to Kirsten's and have different perspectives on the world. So you've got kind of Inara, the person who hates gods, Elo, who thinks everyone should have freedom of faith. Got Inara who quite likes gods, but sort of sees them as sort of cute and distant pets. And then you've got Steady, who is a god and would quite like to stay alive. And that was like perfect for this world, which is kind of all of like moral ambivalence about who gods are and what they are and what they mean to people. Whereas writing in first person, you're kind of like really just taking one point of view and you
mm.
have to challenge it, but you can also like, yeah, you're absolutely right. It has to be really fascinating.
Yeah, the only books I've read recently that I've thought have worked for me first person have been Black Tongue Thief by Christopher Buehlman because I love
Oh,
the character. Character's hilarious and funny and witty, but some people have said the humor doesn't work for me. I'm like, well, that's it. If they don't like the humor, they don't get it. They don't like the book because they can't get into that character. And I'm like, I
mm.
get it, but that's a risk, I think, with first person that you don't have as much. Because some people say, oh, I skipped that character's chapter, or I skimmed that one and got to the one that I like again. And I'm like, yeah, I hear that from readers sometimes of various series, you know.
Yeah, I think in some ways we've all done it to an extent or others, like really identified with one character above others. Um, I think it's, you know, to each their own, I suppose. Like sometimes people just aren't gonna like something you've done, and
Yeah.
that's okay. And we're just gonna sort of live and let live that. Sometimes it's just not my cup of tea.
So now having worked on two books and on the third one, you know, with an editor and your agent and stuff, what kind of stuff have you learned about your own writing process do you think that you'll take forward into the next brand new series? If first person or third, you know, what do you think? Oh, I've learned this now. I won't do that going forward, or I'll do this differently.
I don't really think about that. I've learned a few things. I mean, I've worked with authenticity editors for the first time, kind of, and that has been really revelatory and really, really useful because my main character is disabled. She uses a prosthesis. She has one leg, and working with authenticity editors just showed me like how valuable that kind of work is, and to take the time to be patient and to challenge yourself and to do your research around different people's experiences and points of view and to be respectful of it. It doesn't actually damage a book. It means it just makes you a better writer because you have challenged yourself, because you challenge your point of view. And that was really, really valuable to me. And I think it's made me a better writer and slightly more liberated as a writer, I think, by working with others. Um, Other aspects that I feel I've learned, one thing that I found helpful with Godkiller, and I don't think kind of this applies to all books, but for me, Godkiller is quite a short book. It's 100,000 words.
Mhm.
So for epic fantasy, it's considered quite bite-sized, as you would know as well. Um, and I sort of did that on purpose for book one, but then working with book two, there's so much I wanted to pack in there, and really shedding the weight um can sometimes be beneficial. Sometimes it's like you're really releasing part of the narrative. But for me, it was a really great exercise and being kind of like, okay, if people are having this conversation, could they be having it while doing something?
Mm.
Like, also, do they have to have this conversation in isolation in like a house in the middle of nowhere, or could they be on the street? Or could they be in a public place? Are you finding more about the world as these people are walking through it? And I think that made me um has given me more dynamism as a writer, is that kind of saying it's actually really, really hard to like, have people in a public space and having like a really intense conversation. Other stuff's happening around them, but also means that um you're kind of challenging yourself to see the world as alive and messy and complicated. And that's been quite a fun exercise for me. Like even if it's not always last and sometimes there's things need to happen in silence. I just love using each moment to introduce us a little bit more of the world.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. I think it is learning as you go along. I'm still learning. I'm still picking up stuff as I go and thinking, oh yeah, I'll do that differently next time, or I've learned this from the previous series, or stuff I'm constantly reading. You know, there's things that I learn and think, oh, that's really clever. Oh, yeah. Do you,
Yeah.
do you obviously I know the answer to this, but do you still read a lot of fantasy? Because I know some people say it's like a
Oh,
busman's holiday and they can't, and I'm like,
no, I love it. Like, I love it. It's like, because no fantasy is the same. And there's so many different voices and genres and like kind of stories that are coming out, and like so many more diverse stories as well. That saying so you're not going to read fantasy for me is just like saying you're not going to read ever, which some people don't, but for me it's like part of the pleasure of it is kind of seeing what other people are doing with their time and their voices, and kind of being really excited about that and being excited about other writers as well. I think is really a special part of being an author.
love it.
You can send books to me. It's so cool.
I love fantasy. I constantly say it's the ultimate cheat code. I can tell any kind of story that I want within a
Yeah.
fantasy world. I can do anything. I've done crime, I've done horror, I can do war, I can do anything. Mystery,
Absolutely.
spies, it doesn't matter. It's all fantasy. It's all,
Fantasy, as Terry Pratchett says, is the ear text,
that's
the
it.
original text.
That's it. This is what it is.
But I mean, I love sci-fi still as well. I mean, I've just read Grace Curtis's Floating Hotel and I absolutely adored it because it was just like um I think I'd read so much fantasy and historical fiction lately, which I love. Then I was like, yes, yes.
Hmm.
It's really fun to delve into that. So I really like to, I try and read a range. I try and read like a fair bit of like history books as well. Like I'm reading one about the Eleusinian mysteries and like kind of like ancient Greek cults.
Mm.
I love ones about kind of like texts and the translation of texts, and it's just really all these different aspects of like worlds of our world, which help you imagine differences.
Yeah, yeah. I've been getting into Christopher Rocchio, his science fiction, science fantasy books, and they're amazing. There's nothing like I would ever write, but they're so good. I love them. So I got a stack for Christmas. I'm reading them soon. It's just, yeah, I haven't lost my passion for reading fantasy. I can turn off the analytical part of my brain and just love the adventure. And
Mm.
I don't ever want to lose that really, even with writing them. I think that would be sad if I lost my passion.
Right, yeah, the sense of it. Well, yeah, the sense of adventure. Yeah,
We're readers before we were writers and authors, so you
yeah.
know, I'd hate that. Well, Godkiller is out now. Sunbringer is coming out February the 15th. You're busy on book three, and I guess that'll be 2025.
That's
So,
next.
and then something new in the future. Shh, shh. But you've got upcoming events. I'll put links down below to all your socials and stuff so people can see where you're going to be for bookshops and things.
Thank
And
you.
congratulations, because you've this some Godkiller's done phenomenally well. You know, Sunday Times bestseller. It's Waterstones book of the month this year.
Yeah.
Fan's first sci-fi book of the month. Is that
Oh my
right?
God, their first one,
Yeah, yeah,
which is
yeah. So
freaking amazing. But I really hope, this is just the gateway. And the fact that it's done well, I hope means that they will be doing it over and over and over. Like taking like backlist and frontlist titles to be booking around. It just felt really special to me. Um, obviously, but I just hope that this is kind of like first step because Waterstones are just really getting behind how popular fantasy and science fiction is.
mm,
And yeah, I just big respect.
yeah. Well, congratulations. You know, you persevered and worked really, really hard and gone through so many, rejections and knockbacks, and now here you are. So
Yeah, I met you then 7 years later or 10 years later, got a book published.
yeah, I
Yeah,
can't remember how long ago it was, but yeah, we met a few years ago, first time.
yeah. I think it was 10 years ago,
Really?
maybe nine. But yeah,
Shit. Okay.
yeah.
They're making me feel old. Okay, it's time to go. Say good night, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.